Dang it. Hi, I'm Bob Capt, and welcome back to the Camp Chaos Toolshed. This episode, what we're going to do is take a look at this little tool right here. This is our Sandblasting Cabinet. Now, you may be saying to yourself at this point that this is a pretty small cabinet for the type of operation that we have here, doing what we do. But the fact is that this thing is almost perfect. And the reason for that is primarily because we do a lot with the space that we've got here, and therefore a lot of the equipment has to be sized accordingly. A big cabinet is going to take up a lot of space that we really don't have. I don't know where I'd put a larger sandblasting cabinet right now. As time goes by, we're thinking about expanding out the east side of the shop. That might be different. But as it stands right now, this thing is perfect. Now, this cabinet I bought about 20 years ago, and the way it was set up originally was as a bench top model. You can see the feet down here, all four corners. These would, of course, be how it sat on the bench. But as time went by, it became clear that we just need more bench space than we currently have. So what I did is I took this and put it on this stand right here that I made out of angle steel, and put casters on the bottom, put a couple casters that were lockable on there, so that as you're working on the project, that you're not continually moving the cabinet away from you. So and that was a big step forward. The next thing that I did is I put a high-grade pair of gloves in here. Now, these things usually come with some pretty low-grade stuff, and you blow holes in the fingers over time and they get stiff and they're just not very good. These are probably 10 years old, and they're just as pliable and just as good a shape as the day that I bought them. They weren't cheap, but they were worth every penny. I would have replaced several sets by now had I not installed these. Now, once I had the sandblasting cabinet on the stand, the next thing I did was to replace the bottom of the cabinet. The problem was that initially there was just a trough that ran from one side to the other, and the pickup tube ran along that trough to the middle, and the problem with that is that the sand would bank up on both sides of the pickup, and you had to have a lot of sand in the cabinet and to ensure that there was going to be sand at the pickup, and you would be continually scooping sand toward the center. It was just kind of a pain in the neck. Not a big problem, but what I did was made this pyramid-shaped bottom, unbolted the old one, made this so that it bolted up in its place exactly. And you can see right here, I got a little kick out for the pickup to come down, and so all the sand comes down to that point, or is funneled down to that point, and it never runs dry of sand. The next thing that I did was installed this light kit. Now, this is an incandescent bulb in here. This was probably, I don't know, 10 to 15 years since I've installed this thing, because initially it came with a really cheap, ineffective fluorescent tube setup that you had a switch on the inside, and the switch was always filling up with sand. And so I got this kit that's offered separately, and it made a big difference in terms of the illumination levels in the inside of the cabinet. Problem with it is that when you pick up this screen on the bottom in order to change the grit, this thing is in the way, so you got to take this off, you got to take the bulb off, and then do what you need to do. You need to take the screen out in order to change the grit from from 80 grit to 120 grit, and you need to get it all out. So that screen needs to come out of there. If I was to do it over again today, what I would do is get some LED lights and put them on the sides and the front here, and probably get better illumination and also better clearance. The next thing that I did was replace the 1/4-inch thick plastic door. And what we've got here is a frame that I made out of 3/4-inch mild steel angle with weather stripping across the bottom. And instead of the plastic, I've got 1/8 inch double strength glass from the hardware store. Now the problem with the plastic is that it has tear-offs on the bottom that are glued to the bottom. And what that means is your field of vision is the same size as the tear-offs, which are about that big. The rest of this was so cloudy from abrasive hitting it that your entire field was reduced down to that. So put the glass in. You can see that there's a bit of fogging here, pitting from the sand hitting it. That's not a big problem. That glass has been in there for about 5 months. You can still see fine, as you can clearly see as you look down into the cabinet. And it's held in with double-sided foam tape. So what you do when you want to replace it is you just take it over to a bench and lay it on top of a towel and hit it with a hammer, and then break it and take a putty knife and scrape off the foam tape, and then just replace it when you get it cleaned up. As it stands right now, I would say that this will last 9 months, 10 months before that has to happen, and this costs $4.35 to replace. So it's actually, I believe, cheaper than the plastic tear-offs. Now the next thing that I did was to solve the problem of there being so much dust in the cabinet when you're working with it that you can't really see anything. Initially, there was a little filter up here that filtered dust out as you're blowing it out, but eventually it wouldn't take long for that to get filled up, and now you got no airflow and it's nothing but dust. Okay, so what I did was rigged up this little elbow right here and ran it to my regular shop vac, which is fine, but again, you got a shop vac here, you've got this up here, and it's just kind of stuff spread out all over the place. So what I eventually did is I went to a smaller shop vac, because you really don't need that much vacuum. You just need to be able to pull it out of there, and instead of having the filter up on top here in the cabinet, it's inside of the vacuum. Okay, much better, except that now that vacuum filter plugs up every 20 minutes and you got to take it outside and bang it out. Now I became familiar with, about 3 years ago, these cyclonic dust collection systems that you can get to stick on top of a 5-gallon plastic jug in between the floor vac and your cabinet. And those are supposed to work great according to reviews that I've seen. The problem is, again, you've got a chain of stuff here that is kind of spread out all over the floor. And that's something I wanted to avoid. So what I did is I came up with this unit right here. And what this is the Oneida Air Systems Dust Deputy. And what this thing does is the same thing that those larger units do, but on a little bit smaller scale, and you can stick it to the side of the cabinet like I've done here. And the way this thing works is this hose right here goes to the vacuum, which is right there. Okay, sucks the air out of this thing, goes up here into the cabinet so that it sucks the air and the dust out, goes in here, it spins it around, and the cyclonic action through centrifugal force causes it to collect here, drop down into this little glass jar that I put on the bottom, and then it takes it from there down into the vacuum. Now what you see right here is about 20 to 25 minutes worth of sand and dust. All of this would have ended up in that canister and in the filter. And if I were to open this up right now, which I'm not going to do, we would find there was only a few pieces of larger, lighter material down in the bottom of that. So in order to When this thing gets full, you just simply take this and rotate it. You just simply take and rotate this thing. I put it on there too tight last time. There we go. And take it and dump it back into the cabinet and go back to work. I mean, it's not a big deal if you let it fill up all the way to the point where it's up in here, but the problem is when you pull this glass thing off, this glass bottle off, it's going to all go off on the floor. Now, when you're using a sandblaster, we found that you don't really have to use all the line pressure. Like our line pressure here is about a little bit more than 100 psi as it shows up at the cabinet here. You could really do a whiz-bang job of sandblasting at that pressure, but you really don't need it. When we do coating of pistons and bearings with dry film lubricant and also ceramic reflective coatings, we have to texture the surface of the parts, and this is probably what we use the cabinet for more than anything else. But what you don't want to do is tear up those parts in the process. So what we've got here is a little regulator which we can use to drop the pressure down. And what we typically use for doing that is about 25 psi. Does a perfect job of texturing those parts. For other things that, for example, we had some suspension parts in here with a lot of rust. We changed the 120 grit to 80 grit, and that takes about 40 to 45 psi. If you use full line pressure, what you're going to do is you're going to fog this glass, or if you still got their tear-off system, you're going to be going through those things like potato chips. So you really need to put a regulator on here and only use the pressure that you need in order to do the job. Now, another thing that we use this a lot for is sandblasting nuts and bolts. When we do engines, there's a lot of nuts and bolts that we want the engines to look good, and they're all rusty or dirty, and we really need to renew them. So what I'll do with the bolts is I'll take a piece of plastic board like this. It's an extruded plastic that they use to make campaign signs and other things out of. Take a screwdriver and punch some holes in it. Shove the bolts in here, not all the way down because you want to be able to get under the heads as well. And then just hold this piece and just go up and down the line, approach them from different angles. Works great. The nuts and the washers, I will string those on a piece of wire and loop it like a necklace, and then I'll direct the sand at it in such a way as it will spin the nuts and the washers, and then shoot them from different angles, and that works really, really well. So there we are, the Camp Chaos Sandblasting Cabinet. She be small but fierce. Bob Canote, Camp Chaos Chronicles. Well, that's Shakespeare. Midsummer Night's Dream. We're not barbarians out here.